One of the early things that just kind of messed with my mind for a bit is CrossFit athletes have disproportionately well-developed mitochondrial density, but simultaneously tend to have poor capillary density, which you don't see in endurance sports. That just doesn't really make a lot of sense if you're training like an endurance athlete would train. You tend to see those things scale with one another. But what you see with a lot of CrossFit athletes is they have great mitochondrial density, so they could utilize oxygen in the peripheral tissues at rates way beyond what you would see in an endurance athlete. But because the CrossFit athletes haven't spent the time developing that peripheral capillarization, they have a poor ability to dilate their blood vessels in the periphery. So they just kind of fizzle themselves out. The other thing that's kind of interesting is the athletes that do have that capillarization in the periphery and they can dilate their blood vessels, a lot of times they don't have good enough cardiac output for their brains to allow them to do that. So this is where we need to start thinking about systemic cardiovascular control. One of the things that you see in the endurance literature, if we were to do like a arm cranking upper body ergometer, and you try and establish a VO2 max or a VO2 peak because it's very contextual, it's not going to be very high. So you go to cycling and it goes even higher, and then maybe rowing or running, some things that use quite a bit of muscle mass, then you could establish a true VO2 max. There's this relationship that as you use more and more of your total skeletal muscle mass, you could hit higher and higher VO2 peaks until you reach your true maximal total body oxygen consumption, your VO2 max. But that actually tends to occur at about 40 to 60% of total skeletal muscle mass being used. In CrossFit, you often use more than that. The reason why your VO2 actually plateaus when you use that much muscle mass is you're not capable of vasodilating more than roughly 60% of your total skeletal muscle. And the reason for that is that, one, you don't have enough blood in your body to do that. If you vasodilate more than 60% of your muscle, not enough blood, you're going to have a hypotensive event. Additionally, your cardiac output can't ramp up enough to maintain your arterial blood pressure. So if you did vasodilate that much and your master pump isn't able to maintain your blood pressure, you would have autonomic nervous system failure. So when you're dealing with a CrossFit athlete who's having to exercise very high percentages of total skeletal muscle mass, and it's a lot of muscle on some of these men and women, but they're incapable of doing it, you start to see types of limitations in these sports that you would never see in an endurance athlete. So a lot of these athletes, they're really just limited by their systemic cardiovascular control. One, could they dilate blood vessels? Two, will their brain actually allow them to do it? And because their brain's never going to allow them to dilate that much skeletal muscle, you start to see very weird limitations emerging that you're really forced to dig into the literature and try and understand how to reconcile these things, because traditional endurance training models just aren't equipped for that type of demand. And it's even different than just a normal hybrid athlete that wants to be muscular and strong and run really fast miles or marathons, because the CrossFit athlete has to do everything at once.